Welcome to episode 11 of the Dude, Who Are You and What Do You Do For Us podcast. I am really excited to be via Zoom, video and audio with our northern office in Toronto with our famous long-term employee, Kyle Adamo. How are you, Kyle?
I'm very good, Ed. Coming straight from Toronto.
Straight from Toronto, our palatial international Canadian headquarters.
That's right. The T-Dot, the six, the big smoke, center of the universe.
Awesome. And it's the 15th or 16th of October, and I'm guessing you haven't had the first snowflake fly, but it's got to be pretty darn close.
Soon, yeah. It's about mid-50s here today.
Awesome. It's not too far off what it was here the other day in the morning, so we're getting a little bit closer. But anyways, well, welcome. I'm really glad that to get this chance to chat with you and get you on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, it'd be really good just to spend a few minutes on who you are, and you may be the oldest running dude, actually, if you count your time with Windmill and all the way up to 2018.
Yep, I've been doing this a very long time. So I was part of Windmill Software, so pre-DSI. We built software for senior living for ages and ages and ages. So we had client server. When I first started, actually, we still had the DOS program.
Oh my gosh.
So I went through a platform rewrite to Windows and then through a platform rewrite for the web. So I've seen a lot. Very many mobile applications and BI tools and you name it. So it's been a long, hard road, that's for sure.
Now, were you one of the founders of Windmill or one of the original gangster, group of five or whatever?
Yeah. Employee probably number 2. So Sherry Marsh, who's also with DSI, I consider her employee number 1, perhaps, and I would have been employee number 2, and started with supporting software, of course, and realized that developers needed help and they could do a better job, and sort of got into the product and QA. And when we rewrote for the web with TheWorxHub, that was in 2010, we started that right. So we were, 10 years behind DSI as far as getting to the web, and did everything there from deployments to testing to DBA stuff and you name it. So thankfully I dropped one of those jobs.
Which one? I think you're doing like all of them.
I did a deployment last week. We have one customer still who hosts their own instance of the TheWorxHub. It's a long legacy thing we don't need to get into, but did a deployment to their environment last week with a colleague, Janice. So still haven't got out of that one. But part of it, when you're with a product for so long, you retain a lot of knowledge, and a lot of that stuff is still with me. So part of what I've been trying to do over the last few years is get that knowledge out to everybody else and hand off some of those jobs. So slowly but surely.
Doing the math, with Windmill since 1999 to where you're at now, I'm guessing you were practically in high school or maybe just fresh out of university when you joined. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
This was my first job out of university. Yeah. So while I was in school as a fishing guide, that's what I did to earn money in between semesters. But this was my first job out of school. I studied marketing. So of course I'm not working in that field, but to some extent I am still.
That's awesome. So, how did you get started at Windmill? Like friend of a friend, relative?
It was a headhunter, actually. So through my university at the time, a headhunter had found me, and I interviewed with the owner of Windmill Software at the time, and we hit it off and just hit the ground running from there. And we had some pretty big ambitions and grew it to a place where we knew we could be successful. And the only way to really get the visibility that we needed was to be on the web. So rewriting for the web, well, the story going from on-premise where you get a bunch of money up front to SaaS where you get almost no money up front.
Right.
It's a hard road, and it's hard to invest in building software when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar build out and your revenue is going to drop to next to nothing. Crossing that chasm is brutal. So there were some dark times, that's for sure. Software business is not for the light of heart.
No, it sure isn't. It changes, and the competition, the need for speed, always having something a little bit more interesting than the next, sort of software company competitor. I mean, it drives
Yep.
us all. So what's fascinating to me, spending time with you and others, like 20 years doing the same thing, like how do you keep it fresh?
I think a lot of it has to do with the team that we work with. It's a very fanatical, customer-centric team. And it's always good to work with people who have the same agenda as you, as far as delivering something of value to the market that will ensure people have a good day at work. And that manifests itself in a lot of different ways. We were doing, in the windmill days, when TheWorxHub was just getting started, continuous deployment without any automation, just because we wanted to fix those bugs, release those features. It was every day we're releasing. Right. And you can only do that if you're really fanatical on the customer experience. So that part's exciting. Solving problems for customers and getting positive feedback is great. Playing with new technologies and experimenting is fun. It's not all fun though, that's for sure. A lot of it is, you tend to end up solving the same problems 100 times over your career. And that can become tedious for sure.
That totally makes sense. One of the things that's unique about, this team, even after, the marriage with Dude, is you guys have a very distributed development team. Can you tell folks about that?
Yeah, that's sort of shout out to Rogue Squad. Rogue Squad is all over the globe. So Rogue Squad is the dev team. So out of the Toronto office, I think there's 5 of us on the Rogue Squad. I'm counting myself in that. And then we've got a developer in the Seattle area, 2 in southern Brazil near Florianopolis, including our lead architect, Andre. 1 in Scotland, 3 from On Target in St. Petersburg. We've got Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City. So we're all over the place. So wow. It's because of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted.
Sorry, because of that sort of structure, we're pretty light on meetings and pretty high on collaboration. So we're continually collaborating.
How do you pull that all together? I mean, I did a quick count on my fingers and ran out of fingers around 7 or 8, but like you had like 7 or 8 different locations.
Yep.
And languages and time zones. Like, how do you pull all that shit together?
It is challenging when you do it for long enough. You'll have it no other way. The nice thing about it is the tools that are available nowadays. Teams is a good example. Zoom's a good example. We were big on Microsoft Lync previously, or Skype for Business or whatever. But it forces you to work differently. It forces you never have to spend time looking for a meeting room. You cut that whole thing out, right? You never have to. One of the things that we made as sort of a rule is if one person's remote, all people are remote. Everyone gets on a headset, because it's not fair. And being on the short end of this stick where everyone's in a meeting room and you're on speaker and you're the remote guy, that's impossible. It's not fair. So we make sure that when we get on meetings with people, everyone's on a headset. It's actually very easy, and you've got a paper trail of everything, Ed. It's fantastic.
No, that makes total sense. And not to plug Zoom here, but it's a great tool. You got the whole Brady Bunch sort of view of the video and the ability to sort of communicate with that. When you think about benefits of having such a distributed team, like what are 1 or 2 of the things you're like, this totally kicks butt compared to a traditional sort of squad around a big table? And then what's the biggest drawback, you think?
The biggest benefit, I think, is availability of talent. It's just the globe is filled with talented people who can speak and write English well, which I need. When it comes to the code and the business problem you're solving, it doesn't really matter where you're from. So having access to talent wherever they may sit is by far the biggest benefit. We found true rock stars with that mentality, just not limiting ourselves to geography, which was huge. Drawbacks, of course, are those times where you need to collaborate. Think of the whiteboard situation. You can do a whiteboard online. It lacks some of the it lacks something still, that experience of whiteboarding online. So that part is usually more difficult. Design iterations are tougher. But luckily I've been around long enough that I can iterate 30 times before putting pen to paper, right? Just in your head. So it's, as far as drawbacks, it's, if you ever do want to get together as a team, it's challenging. And I mean, physically get together. I've got, out of all my developers, I've met one of them, and I've worked with them for 5-6 years, right?
That's amazing. So a team of 6 or 7 developers, and you've met one of them after 6 or 7 years.
That's it. So I've had some near misses with them, just you're crossing paths in different parts of the world, but it just, I've only met with Andre.
Wow. That's fascinating to me. And what listeners don't know is, like, this team is like one of the highest performing teams we have in the company. Like, as CEO, I lose sleep over a lot of things. And I was up in the Toronto office, I'm guessing, I don't know, a month, 2 months ago. And one of the things I said with a straight and honest face was, man, I lose sleep about a lot of things, but I don't worry about this team and what they're doing at all. It seems like it's either you guys cover it up really well, or it is what it is. And you guys are kicking some butt. So
I lose sleep for you, Ed. Don't worry.
Sleep, thank you. It's a delegation skill I have. Hey, you don't lose sleep. Give folks a few minutes on who you are. Like, any cool hobbies or anything like that?
Hobbies is tough. I got 2 young kids. So I got Tavish, who's 4, and Charlie, who's 1.5 years. So that doesn't leave time for hobbies, and the job becomes a night job most of the time because of time zones and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. So much room for that. Pre-children, I played a lot of poker.
Poker, awesome.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that if I have to negotiate with you.
Was reasonably successful with that, and I'm still always designing on the side. So I do a lot of selling T-shirts on Amazon, stuff like that, just for extra money.
Yeah. How's it been, you guys were sort of free electrons, and then you joined this much larger entity. Like, what was like one of the biggest, sort of shifts you had to make, or the team had to make, in order to, for lack of a better term, adjust to being part of a much larger entity?
That's an interesting question. Having a boss personally was tough. Shout out to Kevin Stillwell, great boss. But having to answer to people is tough, and when you've gone so many years with calling the shots, it's hard. So that was one of them. Not being able to move at the pace we wanted to move at, just because of the engineering culture that existed at the time. We didn't quite fit into molds. There was a hard road, and we were the first acquisition, right? So it was a bit of a hard road as far as integrating how we work with the rest of the squads. And we were very philosophically oriented around shipping early, very, very early when it comes to product. Just because you can study the problem, you can talk with customers for so long, and you only ever understand the domain problem on release date. So the more you can move that release date up, the more likely you are to get it right down the road without having to refactor a million things. So that's a hard for people to stomach, to ship without knowing pricing or how you're going to support it and all that stuff. But I understand that that's problematic, but sometimes you got to get a user on there and move forward. So we had some challenges with that, being able to ship like we do. We still struggle with access and permissions for certain people who need to do certain things. But for the most part, we sort of kept our pace pretty well. We're shipping pretty often, and we're still trying not to break stuff, and it's going pretty good.
No, it's going really good. You're too humble. So, we typically turn the table for questions and have folks I'm interviewing throw a few questions at me. Let them rip.
It's interesting. One thing that when you were in the Toronto office last, we were shooting the shit, trying to get to know each other. And one of the things you mentioned that you were into metal, and I didn't drill into it because the rest of the team wanted to talk to you. So as a metalhead, Ed, what's your poison?
I got to tell you, my go-to metal is Rob Zombie or White Zombie.
Yep.
Like, and I don't like just to listen to it. I like to pull up the videos.
Of course, yeah.
They're so cool. And he's way before his time, very artistic and thoughtful. But, Metallica, Rob Zombie, White Zombie are two, you got to go there. And then,
yep.
Of course, that whole, late 70s, 80s with AC/DC and
yep.
some of the bands. But, I'm more, these days, my tastes have developed a little bit. I'm more into bluegrass and,
yep.
and still a lot of punk, but mostly bluegrass.
Good. I had to figure out what is because I anything that was sort of anti-establishment, that's what I was into, and metal and hip hop, of course, fell into that when I was a kid. So I sort of
hip hop bug, but
it's the new punk, that's for sure.
The new punk, yeah.
It is.
Well, I mean, if nobody's ever watched Thunder Kiss 65 with Rob Zombie, you gotta pull that video up. It's the most amazing thing.
That was it. That was
beers.
In my formative years. That was it. Yeah. Of course. Here's another question. Stole this from another podcast I listened to. Your favorite online tool other than your own?
Favorite online tool? Wow. I got to say Strava.com.
Strava with a B?
Strava, Strava.
Okay.
It's a exercise tracking app that a lot of runners, bikers, swimmers use to.
That's why I've never heard of it.
I've been using it for a long time. It's great. It's probably my favorite app. And I got to say, although I'm not wearing it today, my keeping with the theme, my Fitbit.
Yeah.
The Fitbit app online is actually really thoughtful, and the dashboard's pretty good. So,
I've used that one. It is an impressive app for sure.
Yeah, but those are the two things I probably use. Oh, there's something I use on my phone, which actually is an anti-app. Which is called Moment. It tracks how much time I'm wasting on my phone. And
I know that one, yeah.
I'm down sub 8 hours most weeks now. So,
nice.
So it's pretty good.
Nice. Okay, last one for you.
Yeah.
Alternate universe, you've gone bust. You've got no money. A nice Canadian comes up to you and gives you $1,000. What do you do to get it back?
Where am I at? Am I in Canada?
You're right here. Yeah, no, you're where you are right now.
I was going to say in Canada, I'd probably invest in cannabis stocks based on where you guys are at.
Tomorrow's the big day.
Tomorrow's the big day. If I had that 1,000 today, it's probably going straight into the.
When's your flight?
I would, with $1,000 in the U.S., to try to change, to try to put myself back in. I would probably try to light up some sort of social media business because I think with $1,000, that's probably the fastest way I can do it.
True. Yeah.
I might have to eat ramen noodles and pork and beans for a month to a year, but that's probably the fastest way I could turn $1,000 into something.
There you go. I like it. That's always been a question that I remember hearing that on a podcast, Mixergy podcast, and the answers that come back are pretty telling of people. It's pretty great.
Yeah, no, there's a man. I'll tell you what, if you can't take $1,000 and make another 1,000 out of it in a month or two in today's day and age, you're just not trying hard enough.
It's that easy, is it?
My bank accounts, and I'll get to try this experiment out tomorrow. But anyways, well, we're delighted to have you the last little bit. We're excited about the future of our healthcare business and all that you and your team have done. And thanks for being a dude.
Thanks for having me, Ed. It's a good time.
Good times. Thanks. Well, this wraps up this episode. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining.